The night air was colder than memory should allow. The wind off the river sliced through my coat and tangled the ends of my gray hair as Lawrence and I leaned against the railing of the old willow bridge. The same bridge where we'd once brought our son Andrew to feed the ducks when he was little. Back then, he'd held our hands tightly, terrified of slipping. Now, decades later, those same hands were behind us. "Do you remember bringing me here when I was a kid?" Andrew asked softly. His tone was flat, his face unreadable in the moonlight. I smiled faintly. "Of course. You were terrified of falling in. You wouldn't go near the edge without both of us holding you." He stepped closer. Too close. His shadow swallowed mine. "Well," he said, voice barely a whisper. "I guess we've come full circle." Before I could ask what he meant, I felt the shove, sudden, brutal, final. My body lurched forward, weightless for one horrifying second before the world flipped upside down. The river rose to meet us. The freezing water punched the air from my lungs, dragging me under. The current was fast, angry, and hungry. My coat filled with icy weight as I fought to breathe, to understand, to live. Lawrence's hand found mine under the water. We hit the shallows, half buried in mud, lungs burning. Somewhere above, footsteps echoed on the bridge, heavy, deliberate. Andrew's footsteps. "Don't move," Lawrence rasped, his breath ragged. "Pretend we're dead." "What?" I shivered so hard my teeth clattered. "He's checking," he whispered. "If he sees us breathe, he'll finish it." I forced my eyes half open. Through the reeds, I saw him leaning over the railing, scanning the black water. He lingered for what felt like forever, his phone's glow lighting his face, calm, calculating. Then, finally, he turned and walked away. We stayed frozen, hearts pounding, the river carrying our tears downstream. Our own son had tried to kill us. As the current pulled at my legs, I realized with a hollow ache that the fall was not the worst part. The worst part was knowing he planned it, that the boy who once feared falling had learned to push instead. And in that moment, cold and broken in the dark, I made a quiet promise: if I live through this night, I'll make him regret believing we were dead. Before we go on, tell me where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories coming soon. The river was quieter downstream, but it wasn't gentle. It hissed around the rocks, tugging at us like it wanted to finish what our son started. My arms were numb, my fingers stiff, but I clung to a broken tree root jutting from the muddy bank. Lawrence was beside me, gasping, his skin pale beneath the river's moonlight. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Only the sound of water, our ragged breaths, and the distant echo of a car engine, fading. Andrew's car. He didn't even stop to check. "Can you move?" I whispered. My voice came out thin, like it belonged to someone else. Lawrence groaned, clutching his ribs. "Not much. But I'm breathing." "That'll have to do." We lay there, half submerged, listening for footsteps, headlights, anything that meant he'd come back. But there was only the dark, the river, and the smell of rust and weeds. When the silence finally felt safe, Lawrence turned his head toward me. "We can't go home." "Not yet." I frowned through chattering teeth. "Then where?" "The woods. Behind the coal farm," he said. "We'll dry off, think." I nodded. We crawled, every inch a battle, through reeds and mud until the ground rose and the water's pull loosened. Each step was a whisper of pain, but pain meant we were still alive. Behind us, the bridge stood tall and empty, the same bridge where our family once laughed. Now, it looked like a grave marker. I glanced back one last time and whispered into the night, "He thinks we're gone. Let's make him wish we were." Then we disappeared into the dark woods, leaving behind the river that almost became our tomb. Before the river, before the darkness, life still carried the sound of routine, the hum of Lawrence's old radio, the soft clink of teacups, the creak of our porch swing on Sunday evenings. Our days were ordinary in the kind of way you never appreciate until it's gone. Andrew used to call every few days. "Just checking on you, Mom," he'd say. His voice always sounded rushed, like his thoughts were elsewhere. I convinced myself it was work stress. He'd done well, or so we thought. New car, new suits, a job in finance. I handle clients, he once said, vague as ever. But little things began to shift. He started visiting alone, without Rebecca or the kids. He'd bring expensive whiskey for Lawrence and talk big, new ventures, business partners, big moves that would secure our future. The more he talked, the less I recognized him. One afternoon, I caught him standing in our kitchen, staring at the house deed that hung framed by the pantry. Still got the original, he'd said, smiling too wide. You two should let me keep it somewhere safe. You know, digital backups and all that. I laughed it off. We've kept it safe for 40 years, Andrew. I think we can manage a few more. His smile twitched, but he said nothing. He poured himself another drink instead. Later that night, I told Lawrence something I'd never said aloud before. Our boy's eyes, they don't look kind anymore. Lawrence sighed, staring into his mug. Maybe he's just tired. But deep down, I knew it wasn't tiredness. It was hunger, for something he hadn't earned. The afternoon Andrew brought the papers was bright and deceptively peaceful. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, glinting off the china teapot I'd inherited from my mother. I remember thinking how ordinary everything felt, the scent of lemon cleaner, the slow ticking of the wall clock, right before my son walked in with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just a bit of housekeeping, he said, tapping a neat stack of papers against the table. The bank wants to update some authorizations. It's just to protect your accounts in case anything happens to you or Dad. Lawrence had been unwell that week, dizzy spells, mild chest pain. He sat slumped in his chair, pale, barely listening. I wanted to believe Andrew. Why wouldn't I? He was our son. He guided my hand to the page. Right here, Mom. Just a signature. They said it's urgent. I hesitated. The form looked official, letterhead, fine print, spaces for initials. My reading glasses were in the living room. Maybe I should, Mom, he said softly, his voice almost tender. You trust me, don't you? I did. That was my mistake. I signed where he pointed, my hand shaking slightly. He gathered the papers quickly, tucking them into his leather briefcase with practiced ease. Thanks, he said. You've just made everything easier for all of us. When the door closed behind him, the silence felt wrong, too clean, too final. Later that night, Lawrence stirred awake and asked, what did Andrew want? I stared at the teapot under the fading light. He said it was just paperwork. But deep down, I already knew, nothing about that day was just anything. It started small, the kind of things you brush off when it's your own child. A missing 50 from the kitchen drawer. A credit card statement showing a subscription I didn't remember signing up for. Then the gas bill came back unpaid, though I was certain I'd sent the check. Lawrence thought I was being forgetful. You've got a lot on your mind, he'd say kindly, rubbing his sore hands. Maybe you missed a payment. But I never missed payments. Not once in 40 years. When I called the bank, Ms. Mira, the clerk who'd known us for years, hesitated before speaking. Mrs. Carlin, the account's been linked to a new online access. Authorized last month, by your son, Andrew. My heart dropped. Authorized by me, you mean? A pause. It's his name, but, your signature. Maybe there's confusion? I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall for a long time. Confusion. That's what everyone would call it. Confusion, misunderstanding, family miscommunication. But in my chest, a quiet alarm had started to ring. That evening, Andrew dropped by unannounced. He brought takeout and a bottle of wine, acting cheerful. You two deserve a treat, he said, grinning too wide. Lawrence laughed, the tension forgotten. But I couldn't. I watched Andrew's hand slide into his jacket pocket, his thumb brushing a folded receipt. When he caught me looking, he smiled. Don't worry, Mom. I'm taking care of everything. His tone was light, but it felt like a threat disguised as reassurance. That night, I wrote my first entry in the small red ledger I kept hidden in the pantry. Just one line, day 1, something isn't right with our son. A week later, Andrew arrived with a real estate brochure tucked under his arm and that salesman grin he wore when he wanted something. "You two have no idea how valuable this property's become," he said, spreading glossy photos of suburban homes across our kitchen table. "The market's exploding. You could sell now, move somewhere smaller, secure your retirement in comfort." Lawrence frowned, pushing the papers aside. "We're comfortable here. This is our home." Andrew laughed lightly, the sound sharp as broken glass. "Dad, it's not safe for you anymore. Stairs, maintenance, neighborhood crime. You're not getting any younger." It was meant to sound caring, but I caught the impatience behind the smile. He'd already chosen a buyer, a family friend who could make the deal fast. The offer looked generous on paper, but I noticed something strange. The buyer's address matched the one I'd seen on the strange online bank transfer Ms. Mira mentioned. I didn't say it aloud. "Not yet." Lawrence stayed firm. "We're not selling, Andrew. Not now, not ever." For a heartbeat, the air changed. Andrew's face went still, emotionless, cold. Then the smile returned, thinner this time. "Of course, Dad. Just trying to help." He gathered the brochures slowly, each movement controlled, careful. After he left, the silence in the house felt heavier than before. Lawrence stared out the window toward the dark driveway. "You see it too now, don't you?" I whispered. He nodded. "He's not asking anymore. He's planning." That night, I checked the locks twice. Not because I feared strangers, but because I finally realized the danger might come from our own front door. It was early evening when the phone rang, the old landline, the one only a handful of people still used. Lawrence was in the garden, pruning roses. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up. "Mrs. Carlin?" The voice was deep, rough, with the kind of tone that belonged to back rooms and unpaid debts. "Yes, speaking. This is Luis Navarro. I'm calling about your son, Andrew." Something in the way he said Andrew's name made my blood run cold. "I think you've got the wrong number," I said quickly. "No mistake," he replied. "He listed this property as collateral. Said it was his to offer. You should tell him his payment's due before people start asking harder." The line went dead before I could respond. When Lawrence came inside, I must have looked pale because he dropped his pruning shears immediately. "What happened?" I told him everything. He didn't interrupt, just stood there gripping the counter, jaw tight. After a long silence, he said, "You're sure it wasn't a prank?" I shook my head. He knew our names. He knew the house. Lawrence exhaled slowly. "We don't tell Andrew about the call." "Not yet. Let's see what he does next." That night, the phone rang again, same number flashing briefly before it stopped. I unplugged the cord and sat on the couch, shaking. I'd always thought betrayal came with shouting, with fights, with words you couldn't take back. But this quiet invasion, was worse. It wasn't just that Andrew was lying. It was that strangers now believed our lives were his to gamble with. The first time I noticed it was at church. The bulletin board by the fellowship hall always had family photos pinned up, anniversaries, baptisms, birthdays. There was a new photo of Andrew and his family, smiling at some charity dinner. Rebecca looked radiant, our granddaughter Emma, sharp but distant, and our grandson Luke, kind and gentle, were perfectly posed. But where Lawrence and I should have been, the family picture we'd taken together last Christmas, was missing. In its place, someone had tacked a flyer for an investment seminar. I brushed it off until I saw the post online a few days later. Rebecca had shared the same photo. Caption, "So proud of our little family. Everything we've built together." The words hit harder than I expected. Everything we've built. Not a mention of us. Not even a tag. At the next church potluck, people were polite but careful. Pastor Joel greeted me kindly but avoided eye contact when I mentioned Andrew. Mrs. Sarah, the church treasurer and my old friend, leaned in quietly. "He told people you two were thinking of moving into care soon," she whispered. "That you can't manage the bills anymore." I froze, the serving spoon trembling in my hand. He said that? She nodded, eyes full of pity. I didn't believe him, Thelma. But others, you know how people talk. When we returned home, I checked the family photo wall. A frame was missing, the one of all of us at the lake. The nail still hung there, empty, like a wound. Lawrence stood behind me, silent, staring at that bare spot. Maybe it fell, he said softly. But I knew better. Photos don't just vanish. Someone took it down, someone who wanted to erase us one picture at a time. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Lawrence had gone to bed. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the slow tick of the wall clock. My hands trembled as I opened the small red notebook I'd bought years ago for grocery lists. I drew a line across the first page and wrote one word at the top, ledger. I didn't know what I was starting, only that I needed proof. Something to hold on to when my own memories might later be called confused. I listed every odd moment since the day Andrew brought those papers. Entry 1, strange withdrawals. Entry 2, call from Luis Navarro, gambling debt. Entry 3, missing photo, rumors at church. Entry 4, Andrew's tone, false kindness. Each word steadied me. Every note made the fog thinner. I added the date he'd invited us to the bridge. He'd said it was to reconnect, to relive old memories by the river. I remember him smiling when he suggested it, as if nostalgia were something he could sell. As I wrote, I realized I was afraid of forgetting details, afraid of letting his lies overwrite the truth. I flipped to a clean page and wrote in neat, block letters, if anything happens to us, Andrew Carlin is responsible. I closed the notebook and hid it beneath the flour canister, where I'd tucked spare cash years ago. Then I turned off the light and stood by the window. The night outside was still. Too still. Somewhere in that silence, I felt it, the shift. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a plan unfolding. And I'd just begun to record its every step. A few days after I started the ledger, Andrew called. His voice was lighter than it had been in months, calm, almost cheerful. Hey, Mom, he said. I was thinking, maybe we should do something nice for Dad. You know, like old times. How about a drive to Willow Bridge this weekend? Remember how we used to feed the ducks? My stomach tightened. The suggestion sounded innocent, wrapped in family nostalgia, but there was something rehearsed in his tone. That's sweet of you, Andrew, I said slowly. But your father's been tired lately. He'll be fine, he insisted. Fresh air will do him good. Come on, Mom. It'll mean a lot to me. He didn't ask, he instructed. The way he used to when he was a teenager testing limits. After we hung up, I wrote the date and time in my ledger, underlined twice. Then I showed Lawrence. He frowned, rubbing his chest. It's strange, isn't it? After all this talk about selling the house and bank accounts, now he wants a family outing? I don't like it, I admitted. But if we refuse, he'll get suspicious. If we go, at least we can see what he's really after. Lawrence nodded grimly. Then we go. But we stay sharp. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moonlight stretched across the floor, silver and cold, and I kept hearing Andrew's voice echoing in my head, fresh air will do him good. I didn't know why, but the phrase felt wrong. Too carefully chosen. Like a line rehearsed before a performance no one else knew was coming. And somehow, I already sensed the next act would take place on that bridge. The afternoon of the outing, the sky was too calm, a washed-out gray that made the world look like it was holding its breath. Lawrence wore his old navy coat, the one Andrew bought him years ago for Father's Day. I remember thinking how poetic that was now, like a final costume for a part he didn't know he was playing. Andrew was waiting by his car, smiling too brightly. Perfect day for a drive, he said. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tight, knuckles pale against the leather. The ride to Willow Bridge was quiet. No music, no chatter. Just the hum of the tires and the faint smell of whiskey clinging to his jacket. When we arrived, the air was cold enough to sting. The river moved slow and dark beneath the old wooden planks. I forced a smile. It looks just like it used to. Andrew stood beside us, eyes on the water. Yeah, he murmured. Full circle. Lawrence chuckled weakly. You always hated this place as a kid. Andrew's lips twitched. Guess I got over it. Then he stepped closer, too close, and before I could understand, his hand shot forward. The shove came with a grunt, hard and final. The world tilted, weight vanished, and the wind tore the scream from my throat. I hit the water beside Lawrence, cold slicing through every nerve. Above, the wooden planks groaned under retreating footsteps. Lawrence's voice cut through the chaos, ragged but sure, don't move. Pretend we're dead. Through stinging eyes, I saw my son's silhouette leaning over the railing, waiting, hunting for movement. We stayed still, half drowned, hearts breaking in unison. And in that silence, something inside me shattered beyond repair. We didn't sleep that night. The house felt smaller, colder, as if the walls themselves had heard what happened. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a footstep, every gust of wind like a breath behind the door. Lawrence sat by the window with a blanket around his shoulders, his ribs still aching from the fall. I brewed tea just to keep my hands from shaking. Before dawn, when the road was empty, we slipped back home by the back lane and changed into dry clothes. As the first light broke, I opened my red ledger again. My handwriting from before the bridge looked calm, almost naive. I turned to a blank page and wrote the date in large, trembling letters. Beneath it, one sentence, he tried to kill us. Then I opened my old flip phone, the one Andrew had called ancient and begged me to replace. I pressed record. My voice cracked as I spoke. If you're hearing this, it means my son, Andrew Carlin, pushed us off Willow Bridge tonight. We're alive, but we can't trust anyone until we know what he's done with our money, our house, or our names. I paused, breathing shallowly. We didn't drown. But maybe we were supposed to. I hid the phone inside the flower jar, sealing the lid tight. Lawrence watched quietly from his chair. Someone needs to hear the truth, I said. He nodded. Someone will. Outside, a car engine roared down the street, too slow, lingering. We both froze, listening. Do you think he's looking for us? I whispered. Lawrence's voice was low, steady, like a man already preparing for war. Not yet, he said. But he will. And for the first time in 40 years of marriage, I realized the fight ahead might not just be for justice. It might be for survival. By morning, I forced myself to act normal. I made breakfast, opened curtains, and pretended not to flinch every time the phone rang. But I couldn't stay silent any longer. I grabbed the ledger, wrapped my scarf tight, and walked to the bank. Ms. Mira Shaw had worked there for over a decade. She'd watched Andrew grow up, always polite, always confident. When she saw me that morning, her eyes softened. Mrs. Carlin, you look pale. Everything all right? I managed a small smile. Just need to check some things. She pulled up our account records and frowned almost immediately. That's odd, she murmured. There have been multiple transfers, large ones. And look here, an online access was created in your name but from an address that isn't yours. My chest tightened. Whose address? I leaned in, but the numbers swam. The screen's glow made my eyes sting. For a second I wanted to step back, to pretend I hadn't asked. She turned the monitor slightly. I saw it, Andrew's apartment number. Ms. Mira hesitated, lowering her voice. There's more. A new beneficiary was added to your joint savings account last month. I shouldn't be showing you this, but, look. The screen displayed his full name, Andrew Carlin. Beneath it, a note, full authorization granted via POA. My pulse hammered. Power of attorney? That's impossible. She clicked through another file. It's signed. And notarized. I leaned closer, staring at the signature. My name, curling slightly wrong, the way Andrew used to forge notes in high school. Ms. Mira looked at me carefully. Do you want to file a fraud report, Mrs. Carlin? I nodded, my throat dry. Yes. And please, print everything. She handed me the papers in a discreet folder. As I walked home clutching that evidence, I finally understood. Andrew hadn't just tried to kill us, he'd already begun erasing us. That afternoon, I walked into the police station with the folder clutched against my chest like it was a piece of my own heartbeat. The front desk officer barely looked up until I mentioned the words forgery and attempted murder. Then everything shifted, voices lowered, eyes sharpened, and within minutes, a woman in plain clothes appeared and introduced herself. "Detective Carla Ng," she said, shaking my hand gently. Her grip was firm, her eyes calm and assessing. "Let's step into my office." Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old carpet. I placed the folder on her desk and told her everything: the shove, the phone call from Luis Navarro, the bank transfers, the forged documents. I expected disbelief. Instead, she listened silently, scribbling notes as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back. "Mrs. Carlin, I can't open a full investigation without evidence that directly links your son to physical harm. But," she tapped the folder, "this is a start. You did the right thing keeping records." She asked to make copies, then slid one paper back toward me. "Keep this, the power of attorney document. And if he contacts you, don't argue, don't accuse. Just let him talk. Record if you can." Her voice softened. "You've survived something most people don't walk away from. That makes you dangerous to him now." Those words lingered as I left. Dangerous. Outside, the sun had already started to set, casting long shadows across the pavement. I clutched my folder and whispered under my breath, "Then so be it." Because for the first time since that night, I didn't feel helpless. I felt hunted, but aware. And that awareness was the beginning of my weapon. 3 days after meeting Detective Ng, someone knocked on our door just after dusk. It wasn't a neighbor's polite tap. It was heavy, deliberate, the kind of knock that carries a warning. Lawrence rose halfway from his chair, but I motioned for him to stay. I opened the door just enough to see the man standing on the porch. He was tall, well-dressed, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the tailored coat. "Mrs. Carlin," he asked smoothly. His accent was faint, his tone careful. "Luis Navarro." "We spoke once, briefly." My stomach clenched. "I told you," he lifted a hand, silencing me. "Don't worry. I'm not here for you. I just need to find your son. He owes me a considerable amount of money." Lawrence stepped closer. "We don't know where he is." Luis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you should. Because he listed this house as collateral. I have the paperwork." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, the edges smudged with fingerprints. "You see? It even has your names. Thelma Carlin. Lawrence Carlin." Scrawled signatures, ours, forged again. "I'm not a violent man, Mrs. Carlin," Luis continued, his voice calm as still water. "But I collect what I'm owed. If your son doesn't pay, someone always does." He turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the steps. When the sound faded, Lawrence locked the door and pressed his back against it. "We're running out of time," he said quietly. I nodded, staring at the forged paper still trembling in my hand. Andrew hadn't just gambled with money. He'd gambled with our lives, and the house we built together was now his stake on the table. That night, Lawrence called me into the study. He was sitting at his old desk, a small wooden box open in front of him. Inside were faded papers, yellowed edges, creases from decades of handling. "I was looking for our insurance documents," he said quietly, "but I found something else." He unfolded a deed, one I barely remembered signing years ago during a refinancing. "Do you see this line here?" he said, pointing to the fine print. "Right under joint ownership." I leaned closer. The words were small, but the meaning hit like thunder. In the event of death or incapacitation of one owner, full authority reverts only by consent of both parties, witnessed by the church board. I looked up at him, stunned. "That means," he nodded. "It means Andrew can't sell the house unless we're both gone." Not unless the church verifies our signatures. He must have realized it when the bank wouldn't approve the loan. So that's why, I whispered. That's why the bridge. Lawrence's hand trembled slightly as he traced the paper's edge. He didn't just want our money, Thelma. He wanted the house clean, no witnesses, no questions. I sank into the chair beside him, cold spreading through my chest. For years, I'd thought of this house as our safety, our roots, our legacy. But now it was something else. It was the motive. Lawrence folded the deed carefully and slipped it into an envelope marked church copy. Then he looked at me and said, "He made one mistake, Thelma. He forgot his father reads every line." And for the first time since the river, I saw the glint of fight return to his eyes. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the red ledger open in front of me. The pages were beginning to fill evidence, notes, names, times. But something was still missing. I'd been writing around the truth, softening it with words like betrayal and deception. It was time to call it what it was. I clicked the small recorder on my old phone and spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "My name is Thelma Carlin," I began. "And my son, Andrew Carlin, has forged documents, stolen from our accounts, and tried to kill us." The words felt impossible, like saying them would break the last fragile thread connecting me to motherhood itself. But once spoken, they settled into the air with a strange kind of peace. Lawrence came in quietly, his hand resting on my shoulder. "You said it out loud," he murmured. I nodded. I had to. I can't fight what I won't name. He sat across from me, eyes tired but sharp. "We go to Salazar today. Elder law. He'll know how to protect what's left." I smiled faintly. "And maybe how to make him answer for what's gone." Before we left, I added one more note to the ledger. Phase 1, acknowledge the enemy. Phase 2, take back control. Outside, the wind was cold but clear. For the first time since the bridge, I didn't feel like a victim crawling out of the river. I felt like someone walking toward a war she intended to win. Thelma Carlin, mother, survivor, and now, witness. By the time we reached Mr. Salazar's office, the morning light had already burned through the fog. His building sat above a pharmacy, plain but steady, the kind of place where truth didn't need polish. Mr. Javier Salazar was in his 50s, calm-eyed, patient. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything: the bridge, the forged papers, the bank trail, even the man named Luis Navarro. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Mrs. Carlin, what your son's done isn't just fraud. It's premeditated elder abuse and attempted homicide. But we'll need him to expose himself further." Lawrence frowned. "You mean, talk to him?" Salazar nodded. "He's careful. If you confront him directly, he'll twist the story, say you're confused. But if he thinks he still has control, he'll slip." I understood instantly. "You want to bait him?" Salazar smiled faintly. "Exactly. Invite him to talk about fixing things. Keep him calm, but record everything. I'll handle the paperwork behind the scenes, revocations, freezes, notarizations. You just keep him talking." That afternoon, I texted Andrew, "We need to talk about the bank. Maybe we misunderstood each other. Dinner tomorrow?" He replied within minutes. "Of course, Mom. Glad you're coming to your senses." I stared at the message for a long time, the words burning on the screen. He thought he still held the strings. But what he didn't know, what no gambler ever expects, is that sometimes the people they think are the cards in their hand are the ones quietly dealing the next round. Tomorrow, I'd sit across from my son. And this time, I'd be ready. An hour before the meeting, Ms. Mira patched us into the bank's fraud review panel, compliance, legal, and risk officers who had reviewed my ledger, the forged POA, and the IP trail. Their verdict was swift: freeze every suspicious transfer and coordinate a warrant. Detective Ng left for the courthouse, paperwork in hand, while Mr. Salazar texted me one clear instruction: keep him talking. The cafe was bright and open, sunlight glinting off silverware and glass. I'd chosen it deliberately: public, quiet, safe. Andrew arrived 10 minutes late, as if to remind me who he thought controlled the clock. He wore his usual charm-like armor, a crisp suit, an easy smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look better." I was worried. I forced a smile, my heart steady but heavy. "Just needed some air, that's all." We ordered coffee. I placed my purse on the table beside me, the small button camera hidden in its flap already blinking red. Mr. Salazar had insisted on it. "So," Andrew began, stirring his drink, "about the bank confusion. I sorted it all out. It was just a clerical issue, you probably signed the online access form twice." I nodded, pretending to follow. "And the transfers?" He smiled wider. "Investments, Mom. You'll see the returns soon. You trust me, right?" I tilted my head. "Of course. But the bank mentioned an IP address, your apartments." His spoon froze mid-stir. "Must be a coincidence," he said too quickly. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed, a text from Mr. Salazar, "Police have the warrant. Keep him talking 5 more minutes." Andrew's eyes flicked to my phone. "Everything okay?" I smiled faintly. "Everything's about to be." Outside, a shadow moved near the window, Detective Ing. Andrew's composure cracked. "What did you do?" I met his eyes calmly. "What you taught me, son." I played along. And for the first time, I saw fear flicker where arrogance used to live. 2 days after the cafe meeting, a thick envelope arrived by courier. It was stamped confidential, court filing. Inside was a legal petition filed by my own son. The words blurred as I read them, "Petition for guardianship, on grounds of mental incompetence." Lawrence read over my shoulder, his hand gripping the table to steady himself. "He's saying you're unfit? That we can't manage our affairs?" I nodded, my throat dry. "He's trying to silence us. If the court believes this, he gets full control again. All the accounts. The house. Everything." 2 days later, a court evaluator was assigned, a quiet woman with sharp eyes who spoke little and wrote a lot. She asked calm, factual questions, never once treating us like fragile relics. Her neutrality felt like air after months of drowning in bias. For the first time, I believed the system might actually see us, not just the story he'd spun. It was a desperate move, bold, reckless, and it told me something vital: Andrew was cornered. Within the hour, Mr. Salazar called. "I've seen the documents," he said. "He's gambling on sympathy. If you appear confused or emotional in front of the evaluator, he wins. But if you stay calm, this blows up in his face." Detective Ing followed with another call that evening. "The casino trail's getting clearer," she said. "We've got surveillance of him making deposits. Keep your heads down, he's agitated." That night, our doorbell rang twice, then silence. I peeked through the curtain, a car idled across the street, headlights off. Lawrence whispered, "He's watching." I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming to run. But instead, I picked up my phone and pressed record. "This is Thelma Carlin," I said softly. "If something happens tonight, know that he's afraid, because the truth is finally chasing him." And in that moment, fear stopped feeling like weakness. It became proof that he was losing control. The next morning, Miss Mira from the bank called again. Her voice was tight, cautious. "Mrs. Carlin, I think you need to come in," she said. "There's something new, and it's not from the bank side this time." The branch felt colder than usual. Coins clinked in a teller's tray like distant rain. I sat without taking off my coat. When I arrived, she slid a printed email across her desk. "Your name came up in a policy verification inquiry," she explained. "A life insurance company contacted us to confirm account ownership." My name looked strange beside corporate words I never use. I swallowed, but my mouth was dry. I told her I was ready. Policy type, final expense. Beneficiary, Andrew Carlin. I stared at the paper. My heart seemed to stop between beats. "I never signed any policy," I whispered. Ms. Mira nodded. That's why I called you directly. It looks like it was applied for online using your banking details. I cross-checked the routing numbers. They're yours, Mrs. Carlin. But the email and mailing address belong to your son. For a moment, the room tilted. A final expense policy, the kind meant to cover funerals, death costs, the aftermath of loss. Except this one wasn't meant for comfort. It was bait for profit. She placed a second page in front of me, the premium payment history. He paid 3 months in advance, she said quietly. I folded the papers with trembling hands. He's preparing for us to die. When I told Lawrence, his face hardened in a way I'd never seen. He doesn't want guardianship, he said grimly. He wants a payout. I added the document to my ledger and underlined one sentence twice. If he can't erase us legally, he'll try financially, and finish the rest himself. The pattern was complete now. Every line of his plan led to one chilling goal, cashing in on his parents' graves. That Sunday, the church felt different, quieter, uneasy. Word had spread that Pastor Joel wanted to discuss financial integrity and family accountability. I knew what that meant. Mrs. Sarah, the treasurer, had seen the forged donation checks Andrew had written in Lawrence's name months ago. We sat near the back as the meeting began. Pastor Joel cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the congregation. We are here today, he said gently, to address certain irregularities. Funds redirected, signatures mismatched. We seek truth, not shame. Andrew stood up before the pastor could continue. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice confident but laced with anger. My parents have been struggling. I've been helping manage things for them, donations, bills, taxes. Maybe some mistakes were made, but I've done nothing wrong. All eyes turned toward us. The room seemed to tighten around me. My hands trembled, but I rose slowly. Pastor, I said softly, may I speak? He nodded. I opened my purse and took out the small recorder. My voice filled the sanctuary, Andrew's voice, too. The recording from the cafe. His calm confession, you trust me, right, Mom? The investments are under my name anyway. Gasps rippled through the pews. Andrew's face drained of color. You tricked me, he shouted. Pastor Joel stepped forward. Son, we didn't trick you. You tricked yourself. Rebecca covered her mouth in shock. Mrs. Sarah whispered, Oh Lord. For the first time, Andrew looked small, a man cornered by his own lies. And as the congregation stared in stunned silence, I realized that truth didn't just expose darkness. It burned it alive, right there, under church lights. That night after the church meeting, the quiet on our street felt too thin, too watchful. Lawrence sat by the window again, his carpenter's pencil in his hand like a weapon made of patience. He'll come, he said quietly. He's not done. He was right. Near midnight, tires screeched outside. Headlights flared across our front porch, and the blaring of a car horn shattered the silence. I pulled back the curtain, Andrew's sedan. He stumbled out, half drunk, slamming the door so hard the alarm chirped. Mom. His voice tore through the night. You humiliated me. Lawrence was already by my side. Don't open that door, he warned. Andrew kicked the porch steps, shouting, You think you can ruin me? You're old. No one will believe you. Then came the sound of breaking glass, the front window. I flinched as shards scattered across the floor. Lawrence moved fast, pulling me back into the hallway. We called 911. While the dispatcher spoke, Andrew pounded on the door again. You're nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing. The sirens arrived faster than I expected. Blue and red lights spilled across the walls like mercy. 2 officers pinned him against his car. He kept yelling, even as the cuffs clicked. Ma'am, one officer said gently through the open door, we'll file a restraining order immediately. He's out of control. When they drove him away, I sank onto the floor. Lawrence knelt beside me, shaking his head. He's not the boy we raised, he whispered. No, I said quietly, staring at the broken window, the cold wind pushing through it. He's the man we let walk too far without consequences. The next morning, I woke to a soft knock on the door. For a moment, fear clenched my chest, but when I opened it, it wasn't Andrew. It was Rebecca, pale, red-eyed, holding a crumpled folder to her chest. "Please," she whispered, stepping inside. I didn't know it had gone this far. Lawrence stayed by the kitchen doorway, cautious. Rebecca sat down at the table, trembling. "He told me you were sick," she began. "He said you wanted him to handle things because you were forgetting details. He even showed me signed papers." I believed him. Her voice cracked. "But after last night, I checked his computer. He's been gambling again. Online casinos, illegal poker rooms, thousands lost. And he's been messaging people, dangerous ones." She handed me the folder. Inside were screenshots, transaction receipts, and emails from a man named Luis Navarro. One message made my blood run cold: "The old ones are insured. If it goes wrong, I'll collect fast." Rebecca covered her face. "He's been lying to me too. I think he's scared now, desperate." Lawrence spoke for the first time. "You need to protect yourself and the kids. Stay somewhere safe." She nodded. "I've already called the police. I gave them everything." I reached across the table, touching her hand. "Thank you, Rebecca. This may save lives." As she left, I saw the weight of her guilt on her shoulders. Through the window, morning light spilled over the ledger sitting open on the table. I picked up my pen and wrote the next entry in calm, even letters. When love becomes evidence, the truth finally breathes. By the end of that week, everything was moving fast. Detective Ng called early one morning, her tone clipped but satisfied. "Mrs. Carlin, we've connected the casino payments to your son's account. We also found transfers to Luis Navarro labeled as consulting fees. It's enough to bring them both in." Lawrence and I sat in silence as she spoke. Relief didn't come easily. It felt like waiting for thunder after seeing lightning. 2 hours later, we heard it, car doors slamming, muffled voices outside. Through the blinds, I saw 2 unmarked police cars parked by the curb. Officers moved quietly up the street toward Andrew's house. By noon, the news broke online. Local businessman Andrew Carlin arrested in financial fraud investigation. The headline felt surreal. Seeing his name printed like that, next to words like fraud and arrested, was both heartbreaking and inevitable. But that night, while Lawrence slept, I couldn't shake the unease. Justice never moves in straight lines. Around midnight, I checked the porch camera feed, the faint reflection of a figure standing at the edge of the yard. Not close enough to see clearly, but close enough to watch. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "This isn't over. You took everything from me." No name. But I knew that tone. I forwarded the message to Detective Ng immediately. She replied seconds later: "He's out on bail. We'll increase patrol near your property. Keep your doors locked." I stared at the screen until it dimmed, my reflection faint in the glass. The trap had worked, but so had his rage. And deep down, I knew, a cornered son is the most dangerous kind. The night before the court hearing, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Rain tapped against the windows in steady, nervous rhythms. Lawrence sat at the table, polishing his glasses even though he didn't need to. The carpenter's pencil rested beside him, his quiet anchor through everything. I spread the evidence across the table one last time: the forged POA, the bank statements, the insurance policy, Rebecca's folder, and the printed messages from Luis Navarro. Each paper was a piece of the truth, fragile but deadly when combined. Lawrence spoke softly. "Tomorrow, we end it." I nodded, though my hands were trembling. "He'll try to talk, Lawrence. He'll look at me and call me Mom again." He met my eyes. "Then remember who he became, not who he was." I opened my ledger and wrote the final line of Act 2, not that I called it that, but it felt like one. Tomorrow, truth walks into court. One of us won't come back the same. Before bed, I packed the red notebook, the recorder, and the deed with the church clause into a small leather bag. Then, without telling Lawrence, I slipped something else inside, the blood-stained poker chip I'd found weeks ago on the porch after the break-in. A reminder of what he'd risked to win. As I turned off the lights, the storm outside grew louder. Lightning flashed across the window, and for a split second, I saw my own reflection, calm, resolved, unafraid. Tomorrow wasn't just about justice. It was about ending the game my son thought he could play forever. The storm didn't stop through the night. Wind rattled the shutters, branches scraped against the roof, and thunder rolled so close it felt like the sky itself was warning us. I barely slept. Every flash of lightning pulled my eyes to the clock, counting down the hours until morning. Around 3 a.m., Lawrence stirred beside me. "You hear that?" he whispered. At first, I thought it was the wind again, until I caught the faint crunch of gravel outside. Headlights flared once, then cut out. Someone was in our driveway. We moved quietly. Lawrence grabbed his flashlight, I clutched my phone. Through the slit in the curtain, I saw a shadow pacing near the car, tall, restless, familiar. My stomach turned to ice. "Stay back," Lawrence murmured, stepping toward the door. Then came the sound of scraping, metal against metal. Tires hissed as air escaped. 1, 2, all 4. He was slashing them. I dialed Detective Ng immediately. "He's here," I whispered. "Outside our house." "Stay inside." "Officers are on the way," she said firmly. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm drowned out the sirens until they were right in front of the house. When the lights flashed red and blue through the rain, the figure vanished into the woods. An officer later confirmed the obvious: Andrew's car was abandoned 2 blocks away. When they left, Lawrence sat at the kitchen table, soaked in rain and exhaustion. "He's unraveling," he said quietly. I nodded, staring out the window into the darkness. "Good," I whispered. "Because when the sun rises, it's our turn to finish this." And as thunder rolled once more, I realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break in court. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and rain. The storm had broken just before dawn, leaving the world scrubbed clean but tense, like the pause before a verdict. Lawrence and I sat at the long wooden bench, the weight of months pressing down on our shoulders. My red ledger rested on my lap, its corners worn soft from use. Across the aisle, Andrew sat beside his lawyer, confident again, almost smug. He wore a navy suit and that same careful smile that used to melt teachers and neighbors when he was a boy. Now it looked carved, brittle, a mask glued on for the world. Detective Ng caught my eye and gave a subtle nod from the witness row. Mr. Salazar leaned toward me. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Let him talk himself into the hole." When the judge entered, everyone rose. The sound of shuffling feet echoed like a wave. I looked at my son one more time and felt a strange clarity settle over me, grief and anger braided into something sharper, colder. The judge's voice filled the room. Case number 2214. The People versus Andrew Carlin. Andrew's lawyer stood first, oozing confidence. "My client only sought to protect his aging parents," he began smoothly. "They've been confused, manipulated by outside influences." I didn't flinch, but Lawrence's jaw tightened. Mr. Salazar rose next, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, by the end of today, the evidence will show not confusion, but calculation." A ripple of tension spread through the room. I looked down at my hands and whispered to myself, let truth speak louder than blood. Because in that courtroom air, clean, cold, and electric, justice was finally taking its first real breath. When Andrew took the stand, he looked every inch the devoted son. Hands folded, posture straight, voice calm. "I never meant to hurt my parents," he began, eyes glistening with rehearsed remorse. "I was trying to help them manage their finances. They're not as sharp as they used to be. I was only doing what any good son would." The courtroom murmured. His lawyer nodded approvingly, as though watching a stage play hit every cue. He kept going. "My parents have been manipulated by people who want their money. That woman from the bank, that lawyer, they filled their heads with lies. They think I'd actually hurt them." His voice cracked on the last word. They're my family. I watched in silence, my nails pressing half-moons into my palm. Every word was a weapon coated in sweetness. Then came the tears. Perfect, practiced tears. He even glanced toward me for sympathy. For a flicker of a moment, I saw the boy he once was, his knees scraped, holding up a frog proudly at the creek. But that image dissolved when I remembered the sound of his voice over the river, cold and certain. Lawrence leaned close, whispering, "He's playing the judge." I nodded, whispering back, "Then let him." Every actor forgets their lines eventually. Andrew finished his testimony with a long sigh, head bowed, a man pretending to carry the weight of false accusation. As the judge called for a short recess, Mr. Salazar whispered, "Let him enjoy the spotlight. He doesn't know it yet, but the next act isn't his." And I smiled, not with joy, but with the quiet certainty that truth was waiting in the wings. When the recess ended, the room felt heavier, expectation thick in the air. Mr. Salazar stood, buttoning his jacket with quiet precision. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense claims confusion. Let's test that claim against evidence." He began methodically, like a craftsman revealing each hidden joint of a trap. First came the bank records, printouts showing every forged transfer. Each withdrawal, he said, was initiated from an IP address registered to the defendant's apartment. Andrew shifted slightly. Then came the insurance policy, a tidy document with my forged signature. Salazar laid it on the evidence table. "A final expense policy," he said evenly. "Signed in Mrs. Carlin's name, but traced through the defendant's email. Beneficiary, himself." The courtroom murmured. For a heartbeat, I hoped the speaker would fail. Then I remembered the river and let that hope die. But Salazar wasn't done. He clicked a small remote, and from a speaker came the familiar sound of clinking cups and low cafe chatter, followed by Andrew's voice. "You trust me, right, Mom? The investments are under my name anyway." Andrew's head snapped up. The sound was small but merciless. Truth doesn't need to shout when a room is listening. "That was taken out of context," he shouted. Salazar's voice stayed calm. "It was taken in public, Mr. Carlin. Context is exactly what you provided." Detective Ng followed, presenting casino transfer logs, screenshots of conversations with Luis Navarro, and the blood-stained poker chip I'd found on our porch. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The judge's pen stopped moving. Silence fell, deep and thick. Then Salazar turned toward me. "Mrs. Carlin," he said gently, "would you confirm for the court that this recording and these documents came from your personal ledger?" I nodded once. "Every line of it," I said. "He gambled with our lives and thought we'd never keep score." The truth had finally hit like a wave, loud, undeniable, and unstoppable. The defense lawyer rose slowly, trying to regain control of the room. "Mrs. Carlin," he began, smoothing his tie, "you've accused your own son of heinous acts. But isn't it true that you've been under a lot of stress? Couldn't this misinterpretation be the result of confusion?" I met his gaze steadily. Confusion doesn't forge signatures. It doesn't open casino accounts or file fake insurance claims. He cleared his throat. "Still, you didn't see your son push you, correct? It was dark?" My breath caught, but my voice stayed calm. "I didn't see him. I felt him." I held my palm in front of me, trembling slightly. The hands that pushed me were the same ones I once held crossing that bridge. I'd know them anywhere. The lawyer tried to continue, but the judge lifted a hand. "Move on, counselor." Next came Detective Ng. Her presence changed the room instantly. She laid out time-stamped photos, phone records, and the police incident reports. "The defendant's phone pinged near Willow Bridge at the exact time of the fall," she stated. "His car was seen leaving moments later. The victims were found downstream with injuries consistent with impact from that bridge's height." Andrew's composure began to fracture. His eyes darted toward Rebecca, sitting in the gallery with folded arms, her expression unreadable. Salazar stepped forward for a final question. "Detective, in your professional opinion, was this an accident?" "No," she said firmly. "It was a plan." The room went silent, heavy, electric. For the first time, Andrew looked small, cornered by evidence stronger than his charm. And in that silence, I realized, the river hadn't taken us, justice had just begun to pull him under. Just when the courtroom's air seemed ready to break from tension, Mr. Salazar called his final witness, the child services investigator assigned to Emma and Luke. The young woman approached the stand with a folder clutched to her chest and a calm determination that silenced the room. "Your Honor," she began, "I spoke extensively with both children. They love their father, but they've seen more than any child should." Andrew shifted in his chair. His lawyer leaned close, whispering urgently, but he didn't look away from the witness. The investigator opened the folder. Emma, age 13, had her recorded statement summarized. Her voice trembled only slightly as she read, "Dad said Grandma and Grandpa won't be around much longer, but it's okay because we'll finally get the house." I don't think he meant they were moving. A wave of quiet gasps swept through the courtroom. Lawrence's hand found mine under the table, cold but steady. The investigator continued, her tone firmer now. "Luke, age 9, reported hearing arguments late at night, his father shouting about insurance deadlines and the old ones taking too long. He said he was scared." Rebecca, sitting behind the rail, covered her mouth with both hands as tears spilled down her cheeks. Andrew muttered, "They don't understand. Kids twist things." But no one spoke for him now. The judge nodded solemnly, the weight of those small voices hanging heavy in the silence. I looked at Andrew, not with anger anymore, but with something colder. Because when your own children become witnesses, the line between justice and family stops existing. And for Andrew, that line had finally snapped. The judge leaned forward, hands clasped, the sound of shuffling papers echoing through the courtroom like a heartbeat. The air felt electric, still, yet heavy with everything that had been said. Mr. Salazar stood. "Your Honor, all evidence has been submitted. The prosecution rests." Andrew's lawyer tried one final time. "My client is remorseful," he pleaded. "Surely, intention must be separated from error." The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. "Enough." His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had seen too many families torn apart by greed. The judge glanced down once more, as if weighing our years on a scale only he could see. A sigh moved through the gallery and vanished. "The court finds Andrew Carlin guilty on all counts, including fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and attempted murder." A murmur rippled through the room. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. Lawrence exhaled, shoulders trembling with relief. Andrew just stared, frozen, his mask finally slipping. "You can't do this," he said, voice cracking. "They're my parents." The judge didn't even look up. "That's precisely why it's unforgivable." He read the sentence slowly, each word deliberate. "I didn't blink. If I blinked, I was afraid the moment would slip and he'd be the boy again. 25 years in state prison. Restitution ordered. All fraudulent transfers reversed. The property deed remains with the rightful owners, Lawrence and Thelma Carlin." Andrew lunged to his feet, shouting, but the bailiffs moved fast. The cuffs clinked around his wrists like punctuation marks on the story he'd written himself. As they led him away, he twisted toward me, eyes wild. "You destroyed your own son." I stood tall, my voice steady. "No. I buried the man who tried to destroy us." And when the gavel fell the final time, it didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like freedom. When we came home from court, the house felt too quiet. The same rooms that once held laughter now carried only echoes, the soft creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the old clock above the mantel. 2 chairs at the table sat empty, the ones Andrew and Rebecca had used during Sunday dinners. Lawrence placed the carpenter's pencil beside his plate and stared at the empty seats. "I keep thinking he'll walk in," he murmured, voice hoarse. "Ask for coffee, like nothing ever happened." I sat across from him, my hands resting on the red ledger. Its pages were full now, a record of everything he'd tried to hide. I thought I'd feel triumph when it ended. Instead, it was something quieter, heavier. Mrs. Sarah stopped by just before sunset. She didn't say much, just set a pot of soup on the counter and rested her hand on mine. You did what had to be done, Thelma, she said softly. Truth doesn't erase love, but it protects what's left of it. After she left, I stood by the window, watching dusk settle over the garden. The roses Lawrence had tended for years bent under the evening wind, alive, but changed. Justice doesn't fix everything, I whispered. Lawrence looked up from his cup. No, he said. But it stops the bleeding. I turned back to the table, the chairs still empty. Maybe they always would be. But for the first time in a long while, the silence felt honest. And honesty, I realized, was its own kind of peace. The morning after the verdict, sunlight poured into the kitchen, not soft, but sharp, almost defiant. The storm had passed, and the air smelled of wet earth and iron. I sat at the table with my ledger open one last time, a blank page waiting for closure. I wrote in steady letters, justice served. Boundaries drawn. Then I folded the notebook and placed it in the same drawer where the forged papers once hid. This time, truth lived there instead. Over the next few weeks, I began the slow work of reclaiming what was ours. Mr. Salazar helped us file new deeds, revoke old authorizations, and register the restraining order. Detective Ng visited once more, assuring us Andrew's appeal wouldn't stand. He's still in denial, she said, but his world's smaller now. You've taken that power back. Rebecca moved out of town with the children, starting fresh. She sent a letter, short, apologetic, but sincere. I didn't reply, not yet. Some wounds need distance to heal. At church, people greeted us differently, not with pity, but respect. Pastor Joel shook Lawrence's hand and said, sometimes, truth needs witnesses to stay alive. I replaced the broken windowpane myself, sealing the edges tight. Then I pinned a new photograph to the wall, just Lawrence and me, standing by the riverbank beneath a clear sky. The empty chairs were still there, but they no longer felt like reminders of loss. They were boundaries, visible proof that peace sometimes means choosing who doesn't sit at your table. And for once, that felt like strength, not loneliness. A month later, I went back to Willow Bridge. The air was still cool, the water below restless but calmer than the night it tried to take us. I parked the car a short distance away and walked the rest of the path alone. The wooden planks creaked softly under my shoes, familiar, haunting, but not paralyzing anymore. I carried a small envelope in my hand. Inside was the blood-stained poker chip I'd kept hidden since that night, Andrew's final calling card, the symbol of everything he'd gambled and lost. When I reached the middle of the bridge, I stopped and leaned against the railing, the same place he'd stood when he pushed us. The memory flashed for a moment, the cold water, the weightless fall, the silence that followed. But instead of fear, I felt stillness. I opened the envelope and tipped the chip into my palm. It caught the sunlight, red and dull, like a dried wound. For every debt you thought we owed, I whispered, the river keeps its own record now. I let it fall. It hit the water with a tiny splash, vanished beneath ripples that spread and faded into nothing. A breeze lifted my hair, and for the first time, I felt no weight pressing on my chest. Only air. I turned to leave, pausing to touch the railing one last time. The wood was worn smooth, carved by years and weather, like us. We'd fallen here once. But standing there again, alive, unbroken, and unafraid, I knew this bridge no longer belonged to him. It belonged to our survival. The seasons turned quickly after the trial. The world, it seemed, was in a hurry to move on, even if I wasn't. By autumn, the roses had come back in full bloom, their color deeper than before, proof that some things heal stronger at the break. One morning, a letter arrived in careful handwriting. The return address made my breath catch, Emma Carlin. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I might find, but her words were steady, mature beyond her years. Grandma, she wrote, Mom says we might visit someday, when it feels right. I don't understand everything, but I know you told the truth. Dad lied, and you were brave. I'm learning to be brave too. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it inside the red ledger, not as evidence this time, but as a final entry. I wrote beneath it, truth carries forward. Lawrence joined me on the porch, the carpenter's pencil tucked behind his ear. We didn't speak for a while. The sun sank low, setting the river in gold, the same river that had once tried to erase us. He reached over and took my hand. "Do you ever think about forgiving him?" he asked softly. I shook my head. Forgiveness is for peace. We already have that. We sat there until the light faded, the air quiet and clean. Justice hadn't brought joy, but it had brought clarity, and that was enough. As dusk settled over Willow Bridge in the distance, I closed my eyes and whispered, "We survived the fall, and learned how to stand taller than the water ever rose." If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it. If you have a unique story of your own, share it in the comments below. Thank you for listening.